Okay, so let's just jump into this. This is our theory of change small group recording. And so the first question is, how do you envision change happening in therapy? Or what does that look like? I guess is another way of asking.
What does it look like? Well, I would say that it's a process to start with, you know. So um, that type of change doesn't happen overnight.
Hmm.
I know me personally, going through my therapeutic journey, um, change was a long and slow evolution. And then, you know, a lot of it is really contingent upon the therapeutic alliance and establishing the therapeutic alliance.
Yeah, I was gonna say from last semester, I feel like Therapeutic Alliance was ingrained in us in pretty much every single class. Um, and
Hmm.
that and creating that with a client and making sure that A, you guys are on the same page, B, you've done your background research, C, you have a good flow and a good connection and there's trust
Hmm.
there between each other. That lays the foundation for your entire therapeutic process and journey. And I think, that's why people interview therapists. They want to see if they're going to match. That match is huge to somebody's journey. So I think just as Ben said, like that is the foundation to it. And then building off that, we can use theory and we can use interventions and techniques to build on that alliance and that relationship and then that change. And I guess you go into first, second, third order change, but yeah, I'll let others share too.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you're all saying. And like conceptually, like the idea of the self of the therapist and their way of being such an integral part of this is that really resonates with the way that I look at therapy, which is like
Hmm.
you are enacting change by giving somebody else some space to be more objective about their life and kind of see things from a different perspective. And you can do that by offering them reflection so that they can see things in a way that they weren't necessarily seeing them before. And that reflection comes from you, but it also comes from the theories that you're using and the interventions that you're using. But it really just boils down to helping someone see things a little bit differently than they were seeing them when they first came in.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely changing someone's perspective. I think that's really key.
I agree like wholeheartedly with everything you guys are saying. And I think it's important for us to remember as clinicians that change isn't necessarily on our timetable. Like
Hmm.
it's so unique
Hmm.
to the person, even if it's like the same situation, like you have a car accident where like siblings are in the car when it happens. It's the way it imprints on each person and the experience each person has is so unique because of the uniqueness that I think it's important to remember that like change, we can have an idea and we can have a treatment plan and we could have all these, our boxes checked, but change I think happens one individually, but also like at that pace, whatever that pace looks like, whatever that change looks like. Um, and I know like for me, it was always it just never looked I always had a really fuzzy picture on like what that looks like for my own self or because by change we mean some sort of growth, right? We're either
Hmm.
there's no standing still in life. And so
Hmm.
um I think finding going back to what Amelia was saying of like finding a therapist that is speaking the same language, like the theories are great and obviously we need to know the theories and the law and ethics and all these other parts of it. But I think the compatibility and like understanding like, hey, we as therapists aren't doing the work. It's the clients doing the work.
Hmm.
We're the complete,
Hmm.
hopefully unbiased parties that are there to act as a third party, just kind of listen to what's saying, like, hey, this pattern keeps showing up, or you keep saying this, or whatever we're pointing out. It's kind of like we're there to help organize the thoughts because it feels so chaotic sometimes. Whereas like they're the ones doing the work. So the to some degree the level of change happens, it's in their power. And I think we see this all the time. And like, if people want to change, they will.
Absolutely.
We see that on different things, not even just mentally, like even physically. If someone says they want to gain weight or lose it, whatever their gym goals are, if they don't do anything to fulfill those goals, it's never going to happen. Like it's in their power. But yeah, I think change definitely happens. It has to also happen organically. Like we can't
Hmm.
by any means.
It's interesting that you brought up the car accident thing because so I'm a massage therapist, and one of the things that has been really important in that practice for me is to come to that realization that like not everything feels the same to every person.
Hmm.
So you're constantly negotiating like what's going to help someone relax and like what's going to help one person who is on your table at this very moment in time relax. And a lot of times people will have, they'll have been in, like you mentioned, a car accident. And one person is in a car accident at 50 miles an hour and they walk away and they're totally fine. And somebody else gets rear-ended at 5 miles an hour and they
Mm.
have debilitating pain. And so it's this whole like their whole history affects how they're feeling and how their way of being is right now. So like that kind of meeting them and hearing whatever it is that they're saying and whatever the problem is, the problem, like
Hmm.
whatever it is that they're coming to you with that they want change for and figuring out what they want to do about it.
Yeah, and even that's such a great point. Because even with that, like they could come to you for a problem that it is on the forefront of their minds, but it's in comparison to like over time or whatever, like a deeper issue arises as they're doing the work. And like, oh my gosh, it's not my body dysmorphia. It's this like
Hmm.
grief that I've been carrying for X amount of years. And so it actually took me personally a long time to understand and to realize like it looks differently on people. Like even trauma looks differently on people. And it could be the same trauma. Like I know I had a sick parent. I lost my dad when I was 17. I'm the youngest of five. So my oldest brother was 30. And so there's three others in between us. And we were all there when he passed. We were all there experiencing his sickness get worse. We were all there to support our mom. We were all there for all of the moments together. And yet that grief has presented itself so differently among us. And granted, like you can even argue, well, men versus women, there is a gender
Hmm.
difference between how people process, but even among my brothers, like it's so unique to where like that's kind of where I've spent years kind of formulating this idea of like, because I would get frustrated, like, well, why aren't you guys feeling X, Y, and Z? And I had this moment years ago in therapy where where I realized I was like, it presents differently. Like it doesn't mean the loss is less or that my trauma is more by any means. Like we have this shared trauma. And so I think it's important when dealing with, especially if we're dealing with like in a group setting like a family or whatever the case may be, like keeping in mind whatever the incident may be, as big or small as it may appear, whether it's an accident at 5 miles an hour or you're T-boned on the highway, it's the trauma like embeds itself so deeply and so uniquely that for change to happen, like we have to be adaptable to, hey, Sally needs this, but Jimmy needs something else. Okay,
Hmm.
can I balance both in this space or each one individually? I think is the biggest way we could become agents of change, I think, in the therapeutic world, and at least with those clients. But I really like that example.
It's interesting how, kind of how we deal with grief different and how people deal with grief differently. Um, so when I lost my baby brother. He was only 23. I was totally devastated, crying like a baby, bawling. My oldest sister passed a couple weeks ago, and she had had health issues for a long time, and she told everybody, "Hey, the gig's up. I'm ready to go." And so the way I'm dealing with that loss is just totally different. And so, excellent points because we have to deal with our clients that way too and understand that people grieve different ways. Everyone's grief cycle is different. So It's just, it's interesting. And if I think a lot of our personal experiences will make us better therapists as well. I really believe that.
Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss. That's really hard. That's
Yeah,
that.
it's rough, and so I was her mini me growing up. That was my big sis. I had to be with her all the time. I had to be around her all the time. But again, you know what I mean? She was like, hey, she had health problems, last 2, 3 years, been in a lot of pain, and she's ready to go. Yeah. So I'm processing it a lot different than, earlier loss. So I think that's something that we have to understand. I think as our clients, the different phases in life, that has a direct impact on how we're going to deal with them and their traumas as well.
So sorry, to hear that you lost her so recently too. It's hard. Um, and I think you also brought up a great point in that of viewing things from a very big peripheral view.
Mm-hmm.
Was my client's relationship to this let's just, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
talk about
Mm-hmm.
grief here. Like, what was
Mm-hmm.
my client's relationship
Yes.
to
Yes.
this person? What did they mean to my client?
Mm-hmm.
What stage of life is my client? And all of those things are so
Mm-hmm.
huge. Especially when it sounds like few of us have lost people at younger ages and then lost people at older ages.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it so differently.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
You're
totally.
younger
Totally.
versus when you're
Mm-hmm.
older.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think as a therapist too, seeing that and knowing that our tone will have to be different, our responses will have to be different for a teenager than they will for somebody
Mm-hmm.
who has seen a lot,
Mm-hmm.
bit of loss in their lives. And just viewing everything very systemically and through a very wide whole lens was a great, kind of point that you had brought up within that, Ben. So thank you for
Mm-hmm.
sharing that.
Yeah, and that definitely ties us into the next part, which is what does integration of theory mean, and what would it look like in change? And I think we've been um, talking about it essentially of like the theories are great, but you need the person, the therapist. You need to be able to be present. You need to like be empathetic to where you feel what they're feeling, and like being able to, but also being coherent enough to like, oh, but asking all the questions you were just asking Amelia of like, okay, well, where in the grief lens, which I have my own like theories on it, um, just as I've processed my own, but I think grief is one of those things that like you don't necessarily process out of because there's different phases. And like I think part of our integration, I think what will make us really good clinicians is that human piece of recognizing like you have to be human first. Like, yeah, we need to know the theories. Yeah, of course, we need to know the laws and the ethics and keep ourselves and our clients safe. But if we're not human first, we've lost the whole plot because they, as we're helping them organize their thoughts, we're also creating that safe space where like it's okay for them to process whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
If it's grief
Mm-hmm.
can be so complicated that like
Mm-hmm.
I remember I've had moments and I've told my therapist this of like, I feel like such a piece of like, for lack of a better word, excuse my language, I feel like such a piece of shit for admitting this, but this is how I feel right now. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll do it, say it, because that's how you like, you have to kind of get it out and face like, because at some point, like grief or just in general, like we're going to be seeing and dealing with like some of the ugliest things that
Mm-hmm.
people have experienced, but we're trying to help bring some hope in that situation. And I think part of the integration of the theory of change means exactly that of like helping to remind them like, yeah, this sucks, but and not necessarily like right after be like, oh, but look at the silver lining, because I think I would have punched my therapist in the face. Like, I would have been so upset, like, shut up, like not you too. Um, but I think that like we need to remember to be human, and the way we're able to integrate the theory of change is by being human, is by bringing what we know clinically and like letting that process through our person and like through to them. But it's my
Oh
soapbox.
yeah, I agree. I mean, like first of all, if you were not somewhat humanistic and compassionate and um, empathetic, why would you even come into this profession? You know, and then of course the flip side is, I look at, my journey. Um, I didn't make progress myself until I had a therapist that got me to buy in to the therapeutic alliance. Up until that, I'd probably say I was probably a bad client, but they never created the conditions for the therapeutic alliance for me to buy into it and be a willing participant in my own recovery. And so I'm a huge person of a therapist, when it comes to my beliefs and how I will be with my, future clients. Again, like we're talking about, the theories are great. We will learn the theories. We will implement the theories. We will blend theories as all therapists do. But at the end of the day, it's about us at a humanistic level as people and creating safe spaces and, getting our clients to buy in to being a mechanism of their own recovery and progress.
Yeah, it's such a great point. And you know what Madeline was saying about like almost feeling like I can't, like I don't want to say this out loud. Like there's this saying that's shame dies in sunlight. I don't know if you guys
Mm,
have heard that before, but it's
yeah.
when you're ashamed of something, if you keep it to yourself, it's always going to be horrible and shameful and awful. But if, like Ben was saying, if you're creating that space of being being like making someone feel comfortable with you enough to be able to share, like you're giving them that space to let that secret out and let that shame out, and then it gets a little bit of light and it shrinks and it'll kind of wither a bit. And once you can kind of get through that block of like, this is my shame, this is my, like, I'm just going to keep everything to myself because I'm the only one who's ever felt this way. And no one else could possibly understand what I'm going through. And like, like
Mm-hmm.
pain and grief and shame, they're all liars. And they're going to say, like, you're the only person who has ever felt this and
Mm,
it's terrible and wrong.
that's a great point.
So, like, if you can create that for someone where, like, you're coming into this therapeutic relationship, letting them have that, and being able to like give them that outlet to be able to speak freely. I think that that's huge. And like, I was reading one of the articles for this week, and they were talking about the integrative approaches. It was the Lebo article. And it was this whole long list of like why integrative approaches are so helpful. And really, it just kind of boils down to like it frees you up to do what you're good at and to figure out what's
Mm,
going to work for that person in front of you. And like that was kind of my synopsis of the article. Like there's a list of 8 things, but that was kind of like I think that's kind of like what we're all that's how I'm interpreting what we're all talking about is like we're really coming to this and figuring out how we can most be our most authentic selves
hmm.
in an ethical, professional way to help other people in the best possible way.
Very well said, ma'am. Very well said.
I've never heard that phrase, and I'm totally stealing it because I love it. Like that, I feel like that should be on like shirts and sold
Yeah.
everywhere because
Yeah. Mm,
that is
mm,
so true.
I can't take
mm,
credit for it. One of my therapist friends said it when we were coworkers and we worked in substance use disorder recovery. So there's a lot of shame and a lot of
mm.
stuff tied up in that. So, but yeah, I just that stuck in my head because I was like, oh, that's so well said. And so I thought it felt so true.
Beautiful points all around.
Mm. Absolutely.
And I think this exactly goes into how does your background and cultural identity influence your theoretical perspective? Sorry, I lost the sentence. Influence your theoretical perspective. So you had mentioned like that you had said shame dies in sunlight. You got that from a therapist. I think I'm a firm believer that like everything we've done up to this point will come of use at some point.
Hmm.
Like I think that one of the reasons and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, because this is my own broad brushstroke of a hypothesis. I think one of the reasons people go into healing professions or educational professions is because we're trying to give what we wish we had, right? Like we're trying to
Hmm.
fill some sort of lack. Like um, I know I want to go into the grief space very passionately because I've had to essentially self-soothe and self-navigate for most of my adult life, and it's hard. It's you feel like you were saying, Christine, like you feel so alone and so isolated. And you're like, everyone else seems fine. Like, what is wrong with me? Um, but I think that one of the reasons we pursue these fields, knowing how difficult it's going to be, knowing that there's going to be, I'm sure there's going to be days where we take home our client load and we can't stop thinking
Hmm.
about whomever and whatever situation. But I think that one of the reasons we do it is because we're trying to fill a space that we wish we had so that someone else doesn't have to go through it the way we went through it. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that I know, like, at least in terms of my background, my cultural identity, I'm Middle Eastern. I'm a first generation American. I've been raised in a culture where seeking help for mental health is very stigmatized, to where, like, for 4 of my 7 years of therapy, my mom was like, don't tell anybody. I'm like, it's fine. My brothers know I'm in therapy. They need to go to therapy. Like, if I'm being so for real right now,
Hmm.
therapy would be great for them to go to. But it's still so jarring because they have a lot of what was understood back in Iraq in their mindset here in America. And so um, I think, and especially like in terms of grief, like we don't know how to grieve. Like my people don't. It's really to the extreme of like this isn't healthy. But I think that the combination of like where we've been and the experiences will kind of lead to where what we're meant to do in that purpose in that space, and what we're meant to provide.
No, I totally agree because that's one of the main reasons that I'm here because culturally and generationally. So I'm Generation X, African American, and in my community, in my family structure, we never talked about this stuff. I mean, it was taboo. It was not acceptable. We don't do that. And then on top of that, I was in the Marine Corps for 21 years. So I was double dipping. The socioeconomic part of my culture, the Marine Corps culture, um, constantly reinforce weakness is not acceptable. You know, you have to suck it up, buttercup, and keep it pushing. And so, uh, being in therapy, and there's not a lot of African American males in therapy. There are not a lot of veterans that become therapists. So that's kind of, some of the driving forces for me was to have the ability for other people to have the ability to talk with someone that looks like them, talk with someone who, has experienced the military lifestyle and all the bad things that come with that. And then one of my big things with the wanting to work with the military and doing group with the military veterans, it's not just them, it's their families as well. Because I talk all the time about the collateral damage we cause our families, by not taking care of our mental health, not dealing with our PTSD and all the other things that we have that we don't know we have until we get diagnosed. So, that definitely a big thing for me. And because in my situation, you know, there I've never seen a therapist that looks like me. Never had an African American male therapist. And so then you get into the whole cultural competency thing. And that has always been one of my problems in therapy, the lack of cultural competence. And then, of course, everything from this cis het white male point of view. Um, and, that's part of the reason I was never able to trust people and establish a good therapeutic alliance until I came across a therapist that you know, was open to cultural competency and made me feel comfortable and didn't, you know, in a microaggressive way, disregard some of the things I would talk about when I would get into my racial trauma, from the racism and things of that nature that I've had to deal with. So yeah, you know, that's one of the main reasons I'm here. Like you're talking about, to give someone um, the opportunity to experience what I didn't have the opportunity to experience.
Yeah. I'm also Gen X and I grew up on a farm, so it was kind of a different shades of the same of similar, like
Mm-hmm.
just power
Mm-hmm.
through it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about
Mm-hmm.
our feelings because we don't
Nope.
have time because we
Mm-hmm.
gotta do, gotta make sure the cows are milked and the crops are in before it rains. And like there's always something to do. And so it really kind of set, like when you grow up in that mindset, like you really set yourself up for like being kind of an overfunctional person where it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
like you just gotta, if you're feeling bad, you better do something. Like not feel it, but do something to like distract yourself from it or
Mm-hmm.
avoid it or run from it or like whatever it is. But like, good Lord, don't talk about it, you know? And like part of, growing up at that time was like, you didn't have adults around most of the time.
Oh yeah, we were feral.
Oh, we're just on our own. Like, good luck to you. You know? So, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, like it's funny how there's like similarities in these vastly different backgrounds, but like,
Mm-hmm.
there's still, these points of like, no, we don't talk about that. Don't talk about depression. Like, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and like it was a big culture of like minimizing problems of
Mm-hmm.
like, well, like sure your friend's dad hit her, but like she's okay. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that was not okay. Like, why is everybody okay with that? Or like talking, bringing up depression. Well, everybody feels bad sometimes, and it's just like
Mm-hmm.
so dismissive and,
Mm-mm. Mm.
really just like, growing up in that environment and it was such a small town and everyone was very similar. And if you deviated from that, like previously approved norm, you were just an outsider. And so, that really, like growing up in that environment kind of gave me a different sense of like feeling okay with like needing to be okay with who I am, because I wasn't going to get that outside approval.
Mm-hmm.
Even though like it was so cultural there that like you always needed to behave in a certain way and you needed to tick a certain number of boxes to be, acceptable, really. So, that kind of it kind of set me up to really value like different viewpoints and to look at things in a different way and to like seek out people who see things in a different way. Um, and I think it's one of the things that like I'm so excited about this work because you're going to be constantly talking to people who are seeing things in different ways. Like that's the whole job. So, um, I think that kind of uh that background, I'm hoping that that's going to be one of those things that, like we were talking about before, like everything that has come before leads you into
Mm-hmm.
what's happening now. So,
I
I'm
just got to add to what you said, Christine. So, that's one of the things I enjoy the most about being in this program is the diversity of thought. Because I pretty much worked for or was in the military for 30 years. You know what I mean? So it's everybody thinks the same. You know what I mean? The methodologies are the same. And so I'm enjoying being in an environment where so many different perspectives, um, so many different points of view, and people just see things differently, or like I like to call it, diversity of thought. So that's something I really enjoy uh, being in this program.
Yeah, I feel like I could go at this, and I think we all probably could, so
Mm-hmm.
many different ways through our backgrounds. Like, there's a lot of funnels into that one cup.
Mm.
Oh
Mm.
my gosh.
Mm.
But I, for many of those, straws into that one cup, am such a huge believer in community and um, outside people, outside of your family and friendships and the greater community around, just fostering that. But yeah, I guess a little bit is that, my mom is a marriage and family therapist, geez. And it's interesting because you would think like, oh, you're good. No. I because of that, and I love her to death. But because of that, our family was a lot of the sweep it under the rug,
Mm.
present it really pretty.
Mm.
So, I think Christine, you mentioned it, and Madeline, I think you mentioned it too, and I'm sure you did too, Ben, but it's just, it was like the just keep trekking forward, keep going, keep your head down, make sure it looks good, make sure everyone thinks it looks good. That was the biggest thing. And don't stop and go. And it wasn't until I lost my dad too, and at 16, same age pretty much, it was still head down, keep going, keep the family running, make sure everything's right, keep that kind of facade up. And, we're dealing with it, we're healthy, we're good. And I wasn't so much outwardly she would say stuff like that, but it was very just known, right? It was kind of, God, there's a term we've learned for this, but kind of an inherent rule in the family. And through that, I eventually just shut down, like just completely shut down. And I was like, why am I having like these physical responses to this? Like, just no one's home. Like, so scary. And I grasped for just other ways to view life, which is kind of what Ben was saying. Like, how did other kids, we were a little isolated too. So, like, how did other kids grow up? How do families run? How does this look? What does healing look like? And that was like a whole plethora of realization for me. Um, and there's so many great parts about background and things I grew up with, and I have so much privilege and so much, intrinsic power in my life because of how I grew up. But I think we can take both of those things and add some more straws into that cup and take it into our therapeutic alliance with clients in our therapy room, and, not ever put things like that on them, but be aware of all the different opportunities there are for healing and for growth. And also not just, I guess it's another story of not just judging a book by its cover, or not just, having a client say something and being like, okay, cool, we're good on that. There's so much that they say. I think, Christine, you brought this up earlier of like, oh, okay. Or no, it was Madeline. You said, okay, like you said one thing and then it portrayed something totally different when you really got into that process of working through it, which is so, so interesting. And it's one of my favorite parts about therapy. So I'll leave it there.